All right, good evening. We'll call to order the special council of meeting here on Monday, September 13th, 6:30 p.m. at the Charlotte County Courthouse, located at 123 Frederick Street in beautiful St. Andrews by the Sea. I note that all members of council are in attendance with in attendance with the exception of Councillor Gumashel. Is that correct, Mr. Nopper? He's not on. Okay, perfect. So at this point, we'll look for an approval of agenda. I'll be looking for a mover. I see Councillor Hurdle, a seconder. I see Councillor Blanchard. At this point, is there any additions, changes to the agenda that anyone would like to bring forward? Okay, seeing none, so I'll call the question. All those in favor of approving the agenda, please signify by saying aye. And that is everybody, so the agenda has been approved. We'll move into disclosure of conflict of interest. Any member wish to declare one? Myself, I will be declaring one on the presentation. It's no disrespect to our presenter tonight, just when in doubt, sit it out. So that's what I'll be doing this evening. And at that point, since I'm the only one, we will move right along to presentations. If you just want to give me a moment to leave the room. And if Deputy Mayor Akaji would take over as chair, that'd be greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just got here. Yes. Is that better? Okay. I'll just wait for the mayor to get out of the way. Oh, I mean to leave, sorry. Okay. We have a presentation this evening from Rodney Lagace. The presentation is on Victoria Terrace Street Housing Development. Is that online? Thank you very much, Mr. Nopper.
Mr. Lagace, you have the floor to council.
Good evening, council. Thanks for taking the time to listen to this presentation. I'll be quite honest, my presentation skills are not the greatest, but I will try my best to make it as clear and concise. I want to introduce myself. I'm Rodney Lagace. I'm from St. John, New Brunswick. I currently own and operate 2 businesses in St. John that are tied to the construction industry. In addition, I've got several multi-units in St. John that have been operated for the last 20 years. Tonight, I'm coming in front of council to present a 10-unit garden home development on Victoria Terrace. And I get the question a lot from people in St. John, why St. Andrews? Why are you going so far? Why don't you do it here? There's so much happening. And from a personal standpoint, I think Chris Spears heard this story. At the age of 15, I came my first job to St. Andrews, and I was hired at the Lighthouse Restaurant and Smuggler's Wharf. And I worked 10-hour days, seven days a week. And I thoroughly enjoyed St. Andrews. In addition, my fiance took the culinary course in St. Andrews. She lived in St. Andrews for 4 to 5 years, winter and summer. And again, we have that special feeling for St. Andrews. Anyways, enough of the fluffy stuff. I'll get right into the meat and potatoes. The points I'm making, and this, I've listened to your council meetings in the last probably month. The first one is there's definitely a housing crisis happening, not just in St. Andrews, but other municipalities. And I don't want to go too much into that because I know you guys have spoke on that point. The second point is when I looked into the demographics in St. Andrews, the largest population you have is between the age of 60 and 70. And for us, this is a target market for this development. These are people that are retiring, they own businesses, they want to simplify their lives. And a lot of them, I feel in St. Andrews, probably want to stay in the community. And when we spoke to local realtors, there's no product out there to offer them to stay. So I do know some people in St. Andrews that left. One was a Montague, a nice couple, spoke to them, they sold. They wanted to stay in St. Andrews, but there was no housing that fit their needs. So I think they currently live in Sussex. So we feel definitely there's a demand for this. Thirdly, I think there's a huge potential for St. Andrews in the next 2 to 5 years. There's a lot of migration happening in St. John, in New Brunswick. These are people from Ontario, BC. They're coming here. I don't know if it's COVID based that has brought them to this point, but they come here, they sell their homes. They feel like they've missed out on a lifestyle that we appreciate. And I don't know if we don't appreciate this lifestyle and the scenery that we live in. But anyways, they are coming here, and I think they will come to St. Andrews eventually when there's more housing, more development down the road. So I'm going to go into I'm going to share the first slide. Bear with me here. And I think I'll get off video if that's okay. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to start. This is just an aerial view. Just thought it was fun. It's an old picture of St. Andrews, an aerial picture. I'll just go to the next slide. So the first slide is in red here highlighted, is the land that I've acquired. I think you're all aware where this lot is. It's an acre undeveloped adjacent to Kingsbury parking. And it's roughly 337 feet by 142 feet wide. We've got two issues with the property for the proposal. The first issue was, where do we access this property? So there are two access points, and I won't go into the first one. The one that we've chose is Victoria Terrace. And the only issue with Victoria Terrace is presently there's it's gravel driveway that leads up into that property. I think Chris Hanna owns it. He's serviced it. I've talked to the town and Chris Spear in regards to having the town consider constructing a roadway so that we can access the property properly. The second is the depth of the lot. It's 142 feet in depth. And if you look at this parcel of land to the south, sorry, I'll go back. This is a parcel of land that's about 75 feet wide. It's owned by the town. And I think it was an old plan that included a roadway through here. So on July 8th, we sent a letter of consideration to acquire the land. And I think council's talked about that. They gave us a pretty, an okay standing that they would consider that. They certainly wouldn't consider the full 70, but I think at 35, that takes care of the second problem that we have. So on to the next slide. I just want to show you a conceptual site plan. I'm not sure that any of you have seen this, but this would be a site plan that would include the 35 feet that we would obtain on the southern part of the property. So as you can see here, we would come up our roadway on Victoria Terrace, and this is the driveway or the roadway into the development. On the left and the right, these are single units. And then adjacent would be the duplex. So in total, 8. And I just want to talk about the depth. I know Alex is on this conference call, and Alex helped me a lot with this. He looked at the site plan. This is conceptual. Obviously, we'll have a proper site plan done by surveyors once we can get certain variances. So I might not be exactly right on, but our width of the driveway is about, I'll do feet because meters, I don't understand meters so much, but we've got 18 feet of depth. Our frontage on each of the units is approximately, it varies a bit, but it's between 16 and 17 feet. Distance between the units, which is quite generous, is 18 feet. We wanted some separation, so the lot's not too compressed. Ideally, I wanted possibly 12 units, but it just wasn't possible because when we started designing this with the size and the depth, we're designing a plan that has to fit the lot, and the lot's only an acre. So it was really difficult. It took us almost a month for the design, and this I'm really happy with. But there is a third ask, and that's why I'm kind of here tonight. And this is what Alex pointed out. We need a variance on the setback. And from my understanding, in St. Andrews, the bylaw for a single family home, I believe you need a lot depth of 80 feet. And we're short 10 feet on these two units. On a duplex, Alex has told me it's 100 feet, and we are short 30 feet. So we would ask council for variance on this and this would allow us to move forward. So in saying that, I'm just going to go to the next slide, and I think a lot of you have seen this. This is our conceptual design for the exterior, and I'm really happy with it. I'm not sure what council thinks, but I don't want to go on a lot about this, but there's a few elements that I'll show you in the next couple of slides that we wanted to add. We like to have some natural stone in the front, certainly some shutters. In this package, we would include the landscaping, and not a real elaborate landscaping, but we'd replace some of the trees that would be within the species of this area. You can see we got some boxwoods in the front and fully landscaped all the way around. So I'll talk about the colors. This color would be something we would consider. We'd like to actually incorporate 3 different colors of siding. Windows would all be in that black tone, but I think we're thinking more of a white siding. Then we would have a grouping that would have this blue siding and then maybe a light gray with black shutters. We'd also like to accentuate an accent color on the front of the doors. So every unit has its own identity and it doesn't feel too much, cookie cutter the same. And I think this would really aesthetically look great. So I'll go on to the next slide. And this is just a basic floor plan, what we've come up with. It's a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 1,300 square foot unit on a slab with a 1+ garage. And we enlarged the garage because you don't see this on the drawing, but the back here where I'm pointing, this would house our electrical, our hot water, and our Venmar system. And the way we designed it, and Kelly from Poly Design, is we had to set the garage further back to allow for a second vehicle in the front, because the other drawings that we came up with, there was no way we could actually have 2 vehicles. This vehicle that I'm pointing to would be 2 or 3 feet into the street or the roadway. And as you can see, there's a generous covered veranda in the front, which I think will, anyone that's buying this and living in this complex will feel that community feel. We also have a deck on the back, and I'll show you on the next slide. This was a little bit of we were still working this design, but it's the units are 50 wide, so it's quite wide, and we've got 41 on this side. So I won't talk any more about this. It's pretty self-explanatory. I'll go into the next slide, and this is the plan for the duplex. And as you can see, we haven't transposed them where a lot of these developments you'll see in St. John, we see the 2 garages are connected together. And originally we did that and it didn't look right aesthetically. So I've decided to stagger the units as you see here. And what we're talking about on this one, you can see some of the landscaping that we've done, but I wanted to talk about the features and the finishes that we'd like to incorporate. And speaking with the agents, a lot of the agents here, they gave me a lot of pointers, and they were saying, people are asking for 1,200 to 1,300 square feet on a main level. They want well-appointed finishes, 2 bedrooms, 2 bath, walk-in closets. So we could see we've got off the garage, a nice mudroom with your washer and dryer. There's a seating area to take your shoes off, probably more room to do a little bit of storage here. Walking into your dining room, we'll have an open concept. This would be an island, with a fairly large kitchen and large living area. But most importantly, the bedrooms here are generous. Master bedroom is 14 by 12 and a half, walk-in closet. And what was also important to the client was a double ensuite. So they do want that double sink. They want the walk-in closet with a shower and a guest bedroom with a separate bath. And incorporating storage was a little bit of a challenge, but I think we've got it here, and we've got a little bit of storage at the back. So the features that we're going to incorporate in the build, if this goes forward, would be radiant heating, in-floor heating, 9-foot ceilings. We would like to offer quartz countertops, mid to upper level cabinets and flooring. And I think I've already talked about the decks, the front veranda, along with the deck at the back here, which wasn't on the first plan. So this rear deck, there's probably room to expand that more in depth, or sorry, in length, not depth. So I'll go to the next slide, and this is my favorite. I waited, we worked on this for a long time, and Kelly from Poly Design on a Sunday night sent this to me, and I said, wow, he nailed it. This is like, I feel this it just feels like that cottagey, sophisticated feel for St. Andrews, especially in the location it's at. You can see we've added the stone here, the natural stone on the bottom, the shutters. What I've liked to have had is obviously the colored coated doors, but I think you get the point. And this separation between the units, you know, if you're sitting on your veranda here, you've got, I think it's about 30, 35 feet between verandas on the front and the back. So I don't want to take too much of your time, but I do want to talk about more coming to the closing. People ask, well, is this going to be a condo corp? And no, we're not going to set this up as a condo corp. We would like to set it up as a HOA, which is a homeowners association. And with the homeowners association, we would have an HOA fee monthly. And that would take care of such things as snow removal and lawn care. Additionally, with that HOA, we would attach or have another account set up for a capital cost expense account. And those would be contingencies like 20, 25 years down the road where roofing has to be replaced, your front, maybe rear veranda would have to be replaced. And this protects the investment of the owner, because we've run into this, we've done a lot of work for these associations and garden home condo corps, where they were not smart in setting up the capital cost expense account. And when it came to doing these major renovations, some people couldn't afford to do it, didn't want to do it. And then you've got, a community it's not consistent. One homeowner's doing a roof and the other one's not doing it, and they're not keeping the same color. So in speaking to that, the other thing that we would attach would be covenants. And I'll give you a few examples of covenants that we might include. We would say no fencing, absolutely could not have fencing around your yard. No outdoor sheds. Obviously, I don't know if this still applies, but things like satellite dishes, changing colors on shutters and doors. So the idea there is to keep everything consistent. And when a buyer comes in to buy these, they know what the covenants are and they're signing off on this. And I think it's important because it does keep that homeowner's investment intact. So you don't have a neighbor, just randomly putting up a fence or having a dog shed in the front of the lot. And to be honest, this price point will actually probably not sell to people that would actually have, fencing and outdoor sheds and that sort of thing. So I think the last thing I'd like to say, and I know it's going to come up, is, what are the phases and how long would these take to build? I really want to tell you, I appreciate you guys fast tracking this process. You've made it really kind of easy for me to get the ball rolling. There's been so much work and we're still just, getting through it. But once you have the design plan, and I hope you guys really like it. My plan, we've already had an excavation company come out and look at the land. Once we get the okay, we get a surveying plan with grading plan, and we start the excavation and the infrastructure. And if we can get the infrastructure in place before winter, then I would like to start construction on 5 units. And those 5 units would be the units adjacent to Kingsbrae parking. And my estimated time to construct the 5 units in the first phase would be 6 to 8 months. I've talked to Chris Hanna. He's got property adjacent, and he's a busy guy. He's looked at the drawings, and he's going to look at possibly give us an estimate on the build. And he and I have talked. My skill set is everything within the unit. So we might even form a hybrid sort of construction where Chris is able to erect and waterproof the outside, the vinyl, the siding, the windows, and I would take care of everything inside. But that's not a make or break. Anyways, in closing, after those 5 units would be constructed, then we would go on to phase 2, which would include the other 5. And again, I would love to do that just one after another, but it really depends on where we land. If it's winter, obviously we can't put in foundation, so we'd have to wait until spring, but that is the idea. So in closing, I really hope council sees this project as a benefit to the town. I'm really excited to get into this and excited to present it, even though you can sense I'm a little bit nervous on my presentation skills, but I want to thank you all again, and I'll take any questions that council may have. So I'll just stop the share here and I'll try to get back in.
Thank you, Mr. Legacy. And I'll open it up to council. Any comments? I see Councillor Heenan's hand, so.
A very nice presentation. I enjoy the slideshow. It's very good. I had the privilege of being a president of an HOA for 15 years. And the only recommendations that I can come up with is you definitely need to have an ironclad constitution, shall I say, of what the homeowners can and cannot do, because there's really no legal way of stopping people who decide to put a fence up. It becomes a very sticky situation. That would be my first comment. The second one that I'd like to ask is, are you going to require each new owner to contribute to a contingency fund, which would be kept in reserve in case of, as you said, down the road, you will find that the places will need maintenance. But my problem is with our contingency fund, it didn't keep up with the times. So when we came to a new roof, we had $100,000 we needed, we had $80,000. So it meant that we assessed each homeowner for the 20,000, like divided it up for the 20,000. So I'm just concerned about contingency fund, and 25 years down the road probably wouldn't worry me too much, but I just like to make sure that everything is set in stone when the owners come in to buy. That way there's no surprises.
Yes, absolutely. We spoke with legal and they've done quite a few of these HOAs. They've done some condos. We're not going in the condo route, but that's what I mentioned with the capital cost expense. So if we take an example, these 10 units, perhaps they're paying $200 a month in HOA. Perhaps $150 a month will go for the lawn and snow removal, and we'd have another $50 a month going into that capital cost expense. So at the end of 20 years, I'm just doing quick math, but that would be approximately $100,000. And I think most of these HOAs that we've worked with, they are volunteers, and they have usually 1 or 2 meetings to go over the financials and come up with different things, maintenance that's required. But I think we're talking more about, roof replacement, deck, and possibly windows. But I'd hope my build would stand 20 years for sure. But the other things that we ran into would be just, general painting of shutters. So those were not large expenses for the whole complex to absorb. But thank you for that, and we'll make sure that legal has those covenants set in place. I know we can't cover them all, but we would want to cover most that would cause disturbance to and maybe depreciate the value of the other owners. So thank you.
Thank you.
Oops. Thank you, Councillor Heenan. And thank you, Mr. Legacy. Are there any other comments or questions? Mr. Blanchard, Councillor Blanchard.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Again, yes, thanks again for the presentation, Mr. Legacy. Just a couple of questions. One on the, I don't know if I saw or heard the price point where you were looking sort of for this particular development. I know, for council, we've been talking a lot about affordable housing. I know this isn't sort of into that category, but I'm just curious to know if you have sort of an idea on that, where these would sort of fall.
Well, we're working with our takeoffs right now. The big one is the infrastructure. Until I have an actual grading plan, I can't get an actual cost on what that will cost per unit. So when I look at the land, I have to yield a certain percentage of profit per unit. And I'm anticipating, and don't quote me on this, but I could be into $200,000 to $250,000 to run my water and sewer. One thing I didn't talk about, and I apologize, is wiring, so all electrical would be underground. So in saying that, I really wanted to come in a price point, and I spoke with the realtors to make it somewhat affordable for people that wanted to stay here in that 329 range. But to be quite honest, I think we're pushing between 360 to 380, possibly 390. And I think that's the only way we can actually do it and make sense on this project. And looking at the real estate in St. Andrews, I don't feel it's totally out of affordability. I'm not talking about affordable housing. I wish I could, but I'm talking about more of an affluent citizen of St. Andrews that have sold their homes, 2-bedroom homes, and just want to move into something that's well appointed and suits all their needs. So I think we can get to that price point, but I'll let you know for sure once we have the takeoffs, and we're going to market it with a local realtor. So. Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Blanchard.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for that. And I appreciate, like I said, it can't all be affordable housing for sure. We need a range of housing options in the town. And so I appreciate that answer. Second question, granted, it is a smaller lot. Like I said, we're talking about an acre here and trying to get 10 units into that acre. I appreciate the difficulty you've had, and like I said, the plan that I see here, I think it looks good. Within our municipal plan, though, we do talk about with new developments, things along those lines, setting aside roughly 8% for common spaces or potentially parks or green spaces, things along those lines, right? And I don't see a lot of room for that, and I'm especially I guess sort of focused on units sort of 4, 6, 8, and 10, where they do back onto an existing property. On the other side, they're sort of backing onto the Kingsbury parking lot, so not as big of an issue for existing residents. I know there's a limited buffer space there, but what do you have? What plans do you have, if any, for that buffer space for sort of shielding or some kind of screening, I guess, between the units and the existing properties?
To be honest, I really didn't think we would need a screen or a buffer, but there's still an additional 35 feet that I think council will allow these people to have an option on in regards to that roadway access. So if need be, we could certainly do some cedar hedging. The idea when we had the excavator come in, there's a lot, this is undeveloped, the lot. And when you walk it, there's so many trees on that lot. We would really love to keep all the trees on the perimeter of the lot intact if we can, because the reality is when you start developing this, you're clear cutting the whole thing. But on the Kingsbury side, there were 100-year-old trees on that side. So we would love to keep that if we can, and also on the southern side. So we could certainly accommodate that if it's something that is within the town bylaw, and we get some resistance from those 3 adjacent properties for sure.
Thank you, Councillor Blanchard.
No, that's it for me. Thank you. And like I said, I appreciate the fact or the ability, I guess, to preserve as much of the green space as possible. I think for me, that's a key thing, a key feature, key component for any development that we're looking at going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Legacy, for answering the questions. And are there any other questions from the rest of the counselors or from staff? No? Well, we thank you for the wonderful presentation. I'm glad St. Andrews has bitten your heart and you've decided to come this way. We're very honored to have people come from far away or close by, which is St. John. So we'd be honored if you came. We'll definitely talk about this in council later, and our CEO will be getting back to you.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to thank council again for taking the time.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Is that okay, Mr. Spear?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Deputy Mayor, if I could just comment on a couple of things. There's really not much at this point for council to discuss tonight, just to be clear. Xander can fill in, but it's really, we started the process as we talked about the road closure bylaw, and we went through first reading this past month, so that'll start to go through. He'll have to start to provide more plans to the RSC and to Xander and them so they can look out. The variances will actually go through our new PAC when he's ready to submit that in the building. And I may have to call Xander onto this. If it's an HOM, Xander, will it require rezoning up there, or is it appropriately zoned?
So no, if it's subdivided that way, the serviced residential zoning works for that. It allows for the duplexes and obviously the single family home as well. So it would just be the variance on the lot depth and the subdivision plan approval that would be needed at this point.
So Deputy Mayor, I guess what I'm just saying is there's, right now the concept was brought to us. You understood why we're going through the early steps on the road closure, but there will have to be a development agreement, I believe, at some point as we get into these variances and things, but that will come further down the road. But we want to try to expedite this as quick as we can. So we'll keep on it and try to keep it moving in a forward direction.
Thank you, Mr. Spear and Mr. Legacy. So there are a few things that we have to do before we can solidify this. So it may take a while, but we definitely have it in the process in the works.
Thank
Is
you.
that correct? And nice to hear from you.
Nice to
Thank you
meet
very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. We need the mayor to come back.
All right, we're going to move on now to introduction, consideration, and passing of bylaws and motions. The first one will be a discussion on the RFP related to Diana Drive property under PED 210809. At this time, I'll pass it over to our CAO and town clerk. So Chris Spear and Paul Knopper, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Worship. So as council is aware, we released a piece of property for RFP last week or 2 weeks ago off of Champlain. And so in direction given to staff in August or late July, you want to do a second release of an RFP in south of, or I guess it's north of Champlain, or Diana, so sorry, and the corner that's adjacent to the ball field. So we've been looking at different ways to do this, and the instructions most recently given to us was to release 5 or 6 acres as efficiently as we can. But knowing that the project is that one of the key characteristics council was hoping for was affordability, there's only so much the town of St. Andrews can do on its own. And so certainly we have the land that we can give away, but we're also starting to get into services and things in which we discussed that, you know, it's $2 million to go from that corner all the way to the Bar Road. And so anything we do probably in the first stages is going to run $500,000 or so. And so there's really 2 different ways to go at this. I'm going to throw something at Paul, or maybe, is that Xander's? Xander, do you have the conceptual drawings up there you can pull up? Oh, I scared him.
Sorry, I had the presentation kind of ready. The conceptual drawings.
For the subdivision that CBCL did. If you don't, that's
I
fine.
have them somewhere. It just might take me a minute.
No, that's okay.
Okay.
So I've got it in your package here. I'll just apologize to the folks at home who might be watching. They can't see it. So in this conceptual drawing that council has before you, you have these lots over here, plus a few lots here, and a few lots here. So one element, if you really wanted to get into it really quickly, is that you could just authorize 4 to 5 acres in this little corner, which would minimize the amount of infrastructure that has to go in there, but would still allow development and to get off a few buildings. There'd be some restrictions because of that road through the middle, but I think that's required to get the most efficient use of the thing of the land. What is important to notice, though, on those conceptual drawings is that there's a lot of room in the back of those buildings. So what's on the conceptual drawings really was something like Mr. Lagace had pointed towards, which was townhouses or row housing or garden homes. But another way to look at it is if someone came in with the right proposal, they might be able to come up with bigger, deeper buildings that might create a more tenants and help reduce the cost. And so there's different ways that can be looked. So one way as a town we could do right now to speed things along is release 4 to 5 acres right in that corner on both sides of the road, which would reduce as much as possible the infrastructure costs needed to service those units in that land. But with that doing, the council's going to have to either recover the cost from the developer for those. And like I said, even excluding the market value of the land, there's probably, $300,000 to $400,000 minimum infrastructure cost needed potentially. And then the other big thing, which Xander will get into, is that we'll be foregoing any cost recoveries from some of this, like if new housing programs that are being funded by the federal government, and there was 2 that were talked about today. And in order to do that, it's going to be a more directed approach, and it's going to take a little bit more time. It's the important thing. It's not going to take years. It might take a few months to get this thing put together by Christmas before we release the RFP. But on the flip side, there's potential cost savings, and a lot of the things that we may require. So if I go to an RFP, you find something that you want, well, we may have to go through rezoning and stuff anyway to fit whatever's there potentially, depending what the recommendation is from developers. But if we go the route we've talked about before through the development scheme bylaw, which Xander will talk about in a minute here, that's kind of done ahead of time. And so developers kind of know what we're looking for housing and the zoning that's required. And so they can come with guns blazing, that they know kind of what we're expecting, and they can build accordingly. So at this point, I'd like to hand it over to Xander to talk about development scheme bylaw and the timing of that and how to proceed on that.
Okay, thank you, Chris. I'll just go back to the presentation. This one's going to be pretty quick. And I've gone over a lot of this stuff before, so I won't really review what the development scheme bylaw is. I think we've gone over that. But just sort of, I don't know if I did the best job at the, I think it was September's Committee of Council meeting, explaining some of the timing, some of the economics. And so I'd like to get into that just so I think council can make the best decision with land that is quite valuable. So $1 million for infrastructure, that's a significant investment, and it's certainly an investment. It's not throwing money away. Now, a portion of that could be covered by CMHC, and I will note, as everyone is probably very aware, we're in the middle of a federal election, and given that CMHC is a federal program, depending on how the election goes, could change. really don't know. It's a little unpredictable. We'll know more on September 20th, which thankfully isn't that far away. But if the town is going to cover those costs, then I think it's really important, like with any investment, to really consider your return on it. And that's, from a financial point of view, that comes in the form of property taxes, but of course there's other spin-off benefits to a development, to putting that infrastructure in. Obviously, you want housing not just because it's a tax base, but because people live in it, people work in town, people contribute to town in all sorts of ways, and those are real economic considerations. So it's not just the money. But if it's a development scheme or an RFP with this kind of project, and I know there's the other RFP, and the reason why I think this is different is that there is a significant infrastructure investment required, whereas the other one, the land on Champlain, south of Anchor's Landing, really there's nothing the town needs to do to get that land ready. But for this one, I think it does really, it should take a little bit more time to put together what that bare minimum that is needed for the economics of it. How many units are really needed there? What's the assessed value going to be? And one other thing that the town can do, and this works with any kind of configuration, is like you see with condos or things like that, sometimes that you can have pre-sale targets. So you want to at least get developers saying that they're committed to 50% of the overall project before they begin. So that's a little bit unrelated to everything else I'm talking about, but it's something that can be done for a little bit more sureness behind the investment. And as I said before, really shouldn't just be the money that's considered, but it's important to fully consider the economic implications. So timing, the CMHC capital funding application, it does take time. And as I said before, I probably wouldn't start it until September 20th, but that's not too far away. So it takes about 6 months. And I think before I've talked about the development scheme bylaw and the CMHC funding kind of hand in hand. And while they work very well together, they don't have to be paired. You can do the development scheme bylaw on its own without any additional funding. You can apply for the CMHC funding without the development scheme in place. I think they do work well together, but they don't have to go together. So if you decide to issue the RFP without a development scheme, it's almost certain that you're going to need a municipal plan amendment and a rezoning. So that's about a 6-month process, public presentation, public hearings of objection, which are good things to do and should happen, but it takes time. There's legislated timelines for that. And the development scheme, it's a Community Planning Act bylaw. So it's a very similar process and timeline. You need public presentation, you need a public hearing. So it's the point here is that if you just do the RFP from the zoning bylaws point of view, it's not going to save you time. And the nice thing about the development scheme is that it answers a lot of questions up front. So you're not dealing with negotiation. You've set what your minimum standards are. And if a developer can meet those, great, they can develop. And if they can't, then you don't have to waste each other's time. And we have a template ready for this. To do it a little bit more quickly, we would probably want to leave it fairly flexible for developers. Be generous with setbacks, not have necessarily concept plans that developers have to meet, but just requiring a certain number of units, a certain assessed value on the properties, certain price points for the units that could then be signed off on a development agreement. But we could have this ready in October. And if you think about, you put out the RFP, that has to be out there for a month or so. A developer comes, says, I'd like to do this. And you say, great, okay, now we need to look at rezoning. Now we need to look at municipal plan amendments. it's, I think, a lot better. It's kind of in everybody's best interest if they come and you say, here's what you need to do, and they say, I can do that, and then it's off to the races. And again, in the greater context of how long housing really takes, it's, I wish it could be sooner. And it's great to hear that there's some private market projects coming out. But it's 1 to 2 years away. So not rushing this RFP process, taking an extra, a few weeks, a month. I think in the grand scheme of things, it's not really going to push back new housing much, if at all. And just a few other considerations. I think we got into this discussion kind of naturally with Mr. Lagace. He'd love to do affordable housing, but he can't. You can't. And this is, I've seen it in pretty much every municipality we work in now. If you want quality affordable housing that isn't just, slapped together, mini homes, things like that, old mini homes, it can't be fast. And the good news is that the Champlain RFP, that will be faster. It's really just a matter of picking the right RFP and making sure it meets the zoning bylaw, and it's at least in the right zone. There might be a few things that need to be tweaked, but it'll likely just be variances, not the wholesale rezoning municipal plan process. So that's great. And whether it's CMHC, whether it's free land, free services, if the town wants to see affordable housing, I think there has to be some kind of contribution, whether that's a partnership agreement with CMHC or if it's cash, basically. And maybe we'll see new federal programs coming out, maybe some new provincial ones. But I think my overall point here is, don't there's probably an idiom for this, but don't let the urgency of the housing needs right now rush a process at a sort of important decision-making point, which really isn't the bottleneck point anyways. So even if you don't want to do the development scheme bylaw, with the RFP, I think it needs to be a bit more precise than the one for for Champlain. And it should have those minimum standards in it, because that's going to save everybody time in the long run if that's front-ended in the process. So I'll leave it there, and I don't know if Chris or Paul have anything they'd like to add, or if council has questions for me, but I'll stop sharing there.
Maybe if council has any questions, I'm going to sign off. I'll show you the map that I was referring to easier, but I guess, Your Worship, you can double check to see if council has any questions for Mr. Gopin.
Oh, absolutely. I guess the first one is, when you talk about securing the CMHC funding, approximately how much do you think that would be?
That's me.
Okay, sorry, we had an echo there. So when we talk about CMHC funding, like what percentage would that be approximately?
It really depends. It's not like they give you a number every time. I think it depends on the project. I think it depends on other contributions, but I think it can be up to 50% of the capital costs. And we've checked, and infrastructure would be considered eligible for that.
Well, I heard that you said we get 50% of the funds. No. I guess the challenge, I'll pass it over to the rest of council. I think the challenge is when we issued the RFP for Champlain, we thought the one for Diana would be following suit to give us kind of an option of 2 different looks versus just one. Now it feels like the development on Champlain is on its own, and we'll have a bunch of developers, and we'll have to make a decision based on that quickly. And I don't think that was the way council envisioned both those RFPs. We thought they were going to be coming out at the same time. I know that you mentioned the first chunk, Mr. Spear, but I believe that would require the lift station for $250,000 as well, wouldn't it, Mr. Spear? If everything was to the right of the map under Diana? No problem.
So this red box is Must the old days. Okay, that box is equivalent. The whole development there's similar to one that a previous developer had given to us just to give you a concept. That's a full 8 acres, but as you see, it uses up about half the land that's down there. Council committed to the Passamaquoddy Lodge, which is over to the left there. And so it almost leaves you nothing really to figure out the rest of what's going on down there if you go that way. So if council determined to go that they wanted to start the development, it'd probably be we'd put some over here and make this development much smaller. So right now that has about 10 units per side. You'd probably say, well, we're going to look for something half that size or something. So at least it gives you more options moving forward in regards to future development. If you want to get moving on it right now. So staff would say we'd have to work out the final numbers, but this is the road from Diana going in. We'd offer up this property, this green space potentially if council wants to give that up, and then some of the property over here, probably, a third to half the way down. And that could be allow for a fairly substantial development to get going immediately.
That would require the lift station, correct?
No. So the engineers just happen to be in today, and they're saying two things. A, that at the back of that conceptual plan, there would be no lift station. Where the lift station came in play was when a previous developer came in. He wanted to go into that green space that was towards the ball diamond, and that's really wet and that drops off. This space, especially looking at the elevations, if they follow through with slabs, so basically the building's at ground level instead of going with basements, the elevation's fine for that. It just get a little trickier if they start putting stuff underneath basements or whatever. So even in that little area. Yeah, so I can't point, but so it's once you get behind this conceptual drawing, that space is hidden towards the ball diamond. If going along Diana, that's the area where the water runs from the subdivision. That's why it drops off there.
All right, I asked a few questions. I'll open up the rest of council. I'm sure some other members might have something they're wondering based on the preliminary conversation. I see Councillor Blanchard.
Just again, because we've had a few conceptual drawings that we've seen since I've been a part of council. One of the initial ones did call for, in that space where we have right now, a section of that would be green space. I see that we still sort of have that one section to the sort of the far left side of the red box there, which looks like it's still a green space. I mean, when we're talking about these types of developments, how much are we, how many caveats, I guess, are we putting in place in terms of green spaces as we look at developing? Because we're kind of, when we're looking at those 8 acres that we've outlined there, we're just saying all development, all development, all development. Where do we incorporate sort of common spaces, green spaces, and really have a plan for some of these areas? Or are we leaving that up to the developers? Or again, I know we have a municipal plan to follow. So that would be my first question. Second question would be, where we did have a previous developer come in and look at that area down by the ball field, and we've identified that it would require some funding. Granted, significant amount of infrastructure there with the lift station, but that could go relatively quickly from the sounds of it. I think we could, and maybe we couldn't. Maybe it would still take the 6 month, as Mr. Goppin had indicated, of rezoning and all those types of things. Maybe that would still require some time. I guess my thought was, and maybe this isn't necessarily an issue, if the CMHC funding to bring them on board is going to be roughly about the same amount of time as it would to put out the RFP and get things moving quickly. Given granted, maybe there'd be some zoning requirements or rezoning requirements. I don't know. It would almost be recognizing that through the CMHC we could recover a significant amount of funding. Would that not maybe be offset if we started on another path to get things done quicker, as we had originally discussed, in terms of the two RFPs, the Diana and the Champlain, sort of going out concurrently or roughly at the same time, and maybe looking to recover some costs through CMHC as we develop and expand further up? I'm just wondering if that would be an option, or like I said, if we really don't see a difference in terms of the timelines, then I'm all for looking at CMHC and trying to make sure that we maximize, and not give away what would be taxpayer dollars. If we can save money, we should seriously be looking at that. But if it means a significant delay in the start of some of these projects, then let's say maybe those costs can be recovered later on as we start the development phase early, recognizing we've got a fair bit of space there, right, and some room to grow. So, anyways, just a couple comments, I guess, and questions.
Mr. Spear.
Thank you, Worship. The first thing to understand, Council, too, is that drawing up there is just for your illustration purposes. It's not saying this is what's going to be there. It's just we'd seen a fairly in-depth presentation, so we just superimposed that on that, so you got an idea. All valid questions, but that you control that either through the RFP process or the development process about how much green space or what that green space would look like. So that can all be controlled that way. I think from staff's perspective, we were just giving an idea of how significant it was to go something that big for those number of units. In regards to starting out, I guess I'll just go back to always, if we aren't getting CMC financing, if affordable is your key word, somebody's going to pay for it. So it's either the taxpayer or CHMC is what it really comes down to. And that's where they're now. There's different ways that can look like, because from their own standards, HMC, I think it's 30% of the units, so yeah, have to be affordable to get their funding, as opposed to 100%. And so council's kind of got to get around their head how much affordable they want and what that'll look like. And as we mentioned before, we've also got in the works another development near the community college that we're slowly working on. Yeah, as a mayor, if you can't see, he's crossed his fingers. That certainly probably, that one we have less control over. We're starting to go through the process with the province now and to bring something to council, hopefully early next month or mid next month, for you to have a talk about it and see what next steps are. But that moves at the province's pace. And, and that is what it is. It's not downturning or giving anything to the province. They have certain things you have to go through, and they're having lots of requests for similar situations right across the province. So it's hard for us to move them along. This is where we have the most flexibility because it's our land and our money. It's just a matter of if you're determined to make it affordable, developers can't be expected to put their own money in for no return. Honestly, that's what it really comes down to. And we had a developer who looked at one and said, well, think of it this way, if I can get 5 or 6% in the stock market and to affordable, I'm only getting that. Why would I take a risk on running the property? So we've got to entice them as best we can. We didn't talk about tonight the other bylaw that allows you to say, return some funding. Thank you. Drew a blank, but something like that. These are all tools that can help bring developers in. But council's got to give staff direction on what your key component is right now. Is it housing or is it affordable housing? And Mr. Lagace had talked about what his price points were. So now you've got an idea, and I don't think he's that far off the mark, to be honest. What I mean is between what he can get a return on for something that's going to be a very nice project, but affordable is probably not going to be a third of that, for instance. There's just a certain price point, especially in today's market. And so council's got to decide what they look like. The development scheme bylaw will allow you to, especially with public consultation, allow you to figure that out beforehand and kind of work that all out. But you'll have to be, you don't want to over public consult, or that'll slow it down. I'm not saying not to, but if you do 20 meetings to come up with exactly what stuff looks like, then it could take forever and a day. But if you try to come up with some very basic characteristics you're looking for about how much green space do you want, what is appropriate buffering, what is a price point you're looking for, then at least you can figure out how much the town's got to contribute in order to make this all happen. So what we really need from you tonight is kind of direction on how you want to proceed with this. Like Xander said, we'd met with him earlier today and said, can you guys get working on the first reading of this by the October meeting? And he's committed to doing that. It won't be as much detail. I mean, I guess Xander, I don't know if this is real good practice, but if we have a very generalized version of the bylaw at the first reading to get the process going before public consultation, can we add quite a bit more detail before the second reading?
It would depend on how you do your public presentations and public hearings. The Community Planning Act doesn't really care too much about number of readings, but once you've set the date for a public hearing, that's kind of when things get locked in. And if you want to make significant changes, substantial changes, so things beyond typos and like if you were adding more detail, I think that would be a substantial change. Then you have to start the 21-day, put out the notice, wait 21 days. You have to do that again. So,
yeah, but public consultation isn't the same as a public hearing, correct?
No. So
meaning we can have consultation meetings before we get to second reading, finalize at second reading what you want it to look like, put that out, and have notice of objections or public hearing of objections before going to third reading, correct?
Yeah, that would work.
So that's the option, council, just, but I guess that would, in my mind, speed up the process a bit by introducing the concept and then October, arrange whatever these public consultations look like. And then we could go to potentially second and third reading in November, December.
Any other member of council? Councilor Hurdle.
Thank you very much. And this could be really too early for this question, but I was just kind of curious to know, when we're looking at the amount of units that we see, even if in the hypothetical state that it is right now, we're looking at, at least 100 units, maybe between 100 and 150 units. Add a car to each one of those, or possibly two cars. It's a lot of traffic that gets sent up through the subdivision. I know that the hope is that they take the Bar Road out, but the reality is they're probably going to be coming through the subdivision. So is there any thought to mitigating traffic or adding a sidewalk or making more safer infrastructure for people to drive through?
It'd be a long-range plan would be to connect all the way to the Bar Road. It's significant cost even for you that remember, we originally, when they built Champlain Avenue to the Bar, it was gravel road for 5 or 6 years, I think. I'm looking at Terry, yeah, before we paved it and people used it. But if you think about it, it's undeveloped woods right there. So it's significant cost still to clear the trees out, dig up what's there, put in proper base, even to put a gravel road in. That's possible. I guess it depends on the number of units, to be perfectly honest, and the demographics that are in the units. There was a lot of concern around Anchor's Landing when it went in that it would create a lot of traffic in the zone. It just hasn't. Most people, especially in that community, it's 55, 60 plus, mostly retirees. So they're not running out at the 7 to 8 in the morning, running to jobs and things. So it's more trickles in and out more than competing against the early morning traffic. Like I said, long range plan would be to extend that road right to the Bar. Short term, I guess it depends on the phasing of how many units get built and things, but you're right that short term, they'd probably have to go up, that Diana extension, meet Diana, and head to Cemetery. Anyone heading towards St. John or St. Stephen and not downtown would probably go the length of Champlain up to the Bar and then, out of town.
It's a valid point. So if you lived in that area, if you're heading to the elementary school to drop your kids off, or you're heading to work in town, you will still go out through the subdivision. If you work outside of the town of St. Andrews, you're probably going to go the Bar Roadway. But it's something to consider for sure. Any other member of council? Councilor Neal.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, just a couple of comments, I guess. First off, with the lift station, would that is that something that we foresee being necessary as this development increases? Like at some point, are we going to require it regardless?
No, so the lift station is only needed if the elevation, basically it's like a sub pump for large sewer, where It's because the elevations of the homes are lower than the higher up sanitary sewer line. So when the talk of the lift station was only that previous discussion by Mr. Corbin, where he went beyond where this conceptual drawing goes. And that land was further below the sewer main that was planned. So that's what was causing the issue there. So even going towards the Bar Road, I don't think it won't require any lift stations.
Okay, thank you. I guess at this stage, the way I see it is like we as a council would have to decide, you know, what it is we want to see in that area. If it is a matter of affordable housing, you know, I think I would be more in favor of the idea of picking a parcel of land, whether it is 5 acres, right off that area, and opening that up and seeing what proposals we do get. You know, see what developers come to us with regards to designs. I do like Mr. Gopin's comments regarding whether we go the route of the development scheme bylaw or put some of these conditions right in the RFP themselves with regards to number of units, that sort of thing. I think that's a good idea and something that would help guide these developers when they come to us. And then again, you know, when they come with the plans, that's when I see us looking at sort of the green spaces and the buffer zones and whatnot. And again, it's been pointed out in the past that is included right within our municipal plan. So, I mean, whether we include it in the RFP or the development scheme, it's something that they have access to anyway. And I would think would take into consideration before they put a proposal in. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Neal. Any other member? Councillor Heenan.
Thank you, Your Worship. I do agree with Councillor Neal. I think it's a great idea. I do believe at some council meeting, we found that 2023, which was the proposal date that we could get anything approved from CMHC, was not acceptable for phase number 1. I think that that's what was decided by council, perhaps back in May or June. I'd have to look at my notes, but I'm thinking Councillor Neal's idea is very good. Let them come to us and let us see what they have to make available to council versus us putting stipulations forward that when we're kind of like shooting in the dark. So I do like Councillor Neal's idea. I also agree with Councillor Blanchard on his phase idea as well. So I just wanted to put my 2 cents worth in that. I think it's important that people get to us, like we are the client, and so they can propose to us what they see feasible for like a parcel of land, not give the whole store away, but some of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Heenan. Any other member? Councillor Blanchard.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I think Councillor Heenan makes a good point there, and Councillor Neal as well. Just because I'm recalling the conversations that we had previously with regards to CMHC and how long we thought it would actually take to get sort of shovels in the ground. And I don't know, I might be wrong. I think I kind of heard something a little bit different here tonight in that it seemed like whether we went straight RFP or whether we went development scheme with and then partnership with CMHC, we're still looking at very similar timelines. And maybe I could get some clarification on that because I did hear, I think housing, within I think somewhere around two years was likely the earliest we would see it. Are we expecting that 2-year timeline regardless, or, what is the difference we could, in a best case scenario, what is the difference between the two options in terms of proceeding with CMHC or proceeding straight to an RFP and then having to go through the processes that would be associated with that? Do we have a sort of a clearer picture on that? Because I think to me, that's going to shape my decision in terms of how I think we should proceed.
That'd be a question for Mr. Gopin, I believe.
Sure. Thank you, Your Worship. So I guess, yeah, maybe there's a misunderstanding. So I think what was sort of discussed before was if you go the overall, if you apply for CMHC funding, if you do the development scheme, you're looking at new housing in 2022, 2023. I think the most optimistic I would be be the end of next year. Maybe get something built by winter 2022. With the if you skip the CMHC, because I think that's an uncertain thing in my mind. It takes maybe 6 months. That's what we've sort of been told. It's hard to know. And then so that kind of maybe you could take an approach of, we're going to do this. If we get CMHC funding, that's great. But if we don't, then that's fine. But so I think it adds about 6 months. That would be my best guess, is if you apply for CMHC funding, you're adding 6 months. If you decide to go with an RFP or a development scheme for that land, it's going to be, let's see, you put out an RFP, or you've got a development scheme bylaw. Let's say that you have a developer who's ready to do something by the end of this year. Then they still have to build. So really, building is the thing that takes the most amount of time, by a long shot. So the other, applying for CMHC funding adds about 6 months. And with building, it depends on kind of how you stagger it. So if you can time it so things can start in the spring, that's the best. If you time it so you miss a season, then you basically, the ground's frozen, you can't excavate, so you're pushing it back a year. But that's not a super clear answer. I think the timelines are a little uncertain. But I wouldn't see it adding a huge amount of time.
Just a follow-up question on that, and I might know the answer, but is there any way we could have our cake and eat it too? We could issue the RFP and begin the process, and should the RFP come back favorable, we just stop the process?
Yeah. And CMHC will want site plans. They'll want, they're going to be a partner in this basically, along with the town and the developer. So they want to make sure that they have a good return on their investment too. So I think until you get to the point of ready to break ground, you can still get that funding. It's once you've broken down, once the project is already, you started to put things in the ground, then I think you've lost that opportunity.
So what I'm hearing is there is a possibility of doing both. There reaches a point where you can't have both ways, but through the RFP process, we might get some clarity on what our scheme should be based on what developers are willing to do. If we go down a development scheme that no developer is actually willing to do in our area, I think that the whole process would be almost counterproductive, when they might actually help fuel telling us what we need and then come back. In a perfect world, they come back and say that they're willing to pay for services, and maybe the first section is not as affordable, still affordable hopefully, but not as affordable. And then as we develop the rest of the development scheme, that's the more affordable further down. There's a lot of different things, but one thing that I did hear from this council, because we've had similar conversations, is I do respect the fact that fast housing might not be good affordable housing. But I do respect the fact that this council is having a hard time waiting 2 or 3 years to make impact, because the community needs it now. And I know that staff and yourself, we all agree on that. So it's not like you're trying to slow us down. But I don't know why we wouldn't go to RFP, because again, see what's out there, see what people want to do there, and we begin the process, and we're no slower behind than we were before. Like if that's something we can do, that's personally my preferred option. But I'd like to hear from the rest of council. Councilor.
Thank you, Your Worship. I guess what you just described is basically where my thinking was as well. Having just issued the RFP for Champlain, I don't think there's any harm in going forward if we do pick out, say, 5 acres down there at the bottom portion, and seeing what development proposals do come forward. Again, we're not locked into any of them, but like you mentioned, it may drive or at least give us a good idea of what is out there and what the requirements are. And there's nothing to say, again, as this goes on in a few years, that perhaps the rest of this development, again, the needs might change. It could be that we go back to, putting serviced residential lots in there, again, which is another thing that's a premium around town. So, and the other thing I see, again, and I know I've mentioned it in the past, is it gives us, if we're just focusing on the bottom part here, it does give us time to figure things out with the Passamaquoddy Lodge and let them get their plans solidified before we start moving too far. We're up behind Diana Drive. So yeah, I would be in favor of the same, I think. Again, I don't see the harm in putting out the RFP. I do like the idea of having some restrictions on it with regards to number of units, whatnot. But again, there's no guarantee that we're going to get any proposals, or we could get tons. So.
And just to add on to that, in the process of doing the RFP, we should get some clarification on the piece of land by the NBCC. So council will know, like we talked about not doing piecework, we might have a better view of the total picture of what we're trying to accomplish over these 4 years, because we should by then have a pretty good indication, I would assume, at what we're looking at for that particular, A, can we have it, but B, what it looks like to have it. I'll pass over to any other member of council. Councilor Heenan.
Me again, sorry. I think, Your Worship, that we as a new council need to get our feet wet. We need to show the province, the residents, that we're open for business. And I think it's time to take the rubber boots off and figure this out, because we don't want to be the council that sits on something too long, because then the public, the developers, and everyone loses interest. So my proposal is that we try to do something relatively soon, see what the results are, and then it will give us a bit of a direction as to where we're going. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Heenan. Deputy Mayor Akaji.
Thank you, Your Worship. I definitely think, and I agree with Councillor Neal, that we put the RFP out and then we find out where it goes. But I know waiting is the hardest point of, trying to get housing for St. Andrews, and we all know the need and the urgency that we have to do it. But as Councillor Heenan says, it needs to be done, and we'll have to put it out there and then assess what we need to do and do what we can do in our 4-year mandate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I guess we heard from a few, maybe a quick show of hands. If you'd like to still go ahead with the RFP and do the development scheme process in the background, just raise your hand. Yeah, so we can talk about it all day. I think we'd still like to issue the RFP. We're aware. And I do take into account that when we do get the proposals back, and I hope that we get many, but when we do, at that time, council is going to have to make a decision. Can we do it without CMHC, or do we have to wait for CMHC? And there's a certain point where this council, and it might be part of the budget time, is we're really going to have to set a number that we're comfortable going to make this happen, and what our targets are. Because again, I do, Councilor Blanchard said, it is a bit of piecework, but in order to get something going right away, that's the way it's got to be, it seems. So anyway, I think we've got direction from council. Unless someone else, anything else to say, I think we're at the end of the day, we're almost all saying the same thing. All right. Is that good direction for staff?
It is, Your Worship. There's just one final question. Can we make the assumption that we'll have to work the road into the RFP, meaning that you want the land kind of split like that we're not going to just get in the block and say, make it work? We'll say there's going to have to be this roadway of some sort and you have to work around it.
I'll look for head nods from council, but I don't see how you can develop that land without having a way to get out to the bottom.
Okay, that's what I
Yeah,
said.
no, you're right to assume that.
Okay, thank you.
It's no longer an assumption. Okay, is there anything else on that particular subject item? Otherwise, I'll move on to the next one. You're good, Mr. Spear?
As good as I always am, Your Worship.
Okay, at this point, we're going to move ahead in the agenda. So the next thing would be, let me just jump ahead here. It would be, actually, at this point, it would be an application for the Municipal Finance Corporation. So at this point, I will pass it over to Deputy Mayor Akaji, who is with the Finance and Administration Committee.
Thank you, Your Worship. FA 210904. And it's the application to the Municipal Finance Corporation release of 2021 funds. And the background is this. Council approved borrowing from the Municipal Capital Borrowing Board for various projects in 2020 and 2021. Now that some of those projects are complete, we are able to go and make an application to the Municipal Finance Corporation to get the funds released, $328,000. Also included in the refinancing of a debenture from 2011 of $121,000. The projects being financed are as follows. And the motion is, be it resolved that the CAO or Assistant Treasurer and Mayor or Deputy Mayor be authorized to issue and sell to the New Brunswick Municipal Finance Corporation a municipality of the Town of St. Andrews debenture in the principal sum of $449,000 on such terms and conditions as are recommended by the New Brunswick Municipal Finance Corporation. And be it resolved that the municipality of the Town of St. Andrews agrees to issue post-dated checks payable to the New Brunswick Municipal Finance Corporation, and when requested, in payment of principal and interest charges on the debenture. Do you want me to read the chart? Is it necessary?
I do not believe we need to read the chart. Is that correct, Mr. Knopper?
Mr. Knopper, is it requested that I do it? Yes.
Go through the ministerial order, thank you. The ministerial order numbers and stuff, but maybe where it says purpose by function, the amount and the term, just if the deputy
So
mayor
just
could
the
read through that.
general and the amount in dollars and the terms?
So like recreation, $42,000 for 15 years.
So from the general, the recreation of $42,000 and the term is 15 years. Purpose for the function, transportation, $60,000, 15 years. Transportation, $56,000 for 10 years. And transportation for $65,000 for 5 years. On the utility side, environmental health, $194,000 for 25 years. Environmental health, $8,000, 5 years. And environmental health, $24,000 for 10 years. And I so move this.
Are we looking for a seconder for that motion? Counselor Blanchard, and any discussion on this one? All right, let's go ahead. All those in favor of this motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
That is everybody, and that motion has been carried. Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. I appreciate that. At this point, we are getting into the 2022 draft municipal budget discussion, FA 210905. At this point, we will pass it over to Mr. Spear, who will get our whole budget done in about 20 minutes for us. Correct, Mr. Spear? All right, it might take more than 20 minutes.
Sorry. What's that? Right, it'll work. Yeah, to work well under pressure. There we go. All right, council, we're going to start going through the budget tonight. The presentation tonight is only based on the general operating fund. If you can go faster than that, then we'll have to just jump to the paper copy, but I can't, usually it takes me up to 3 to go through the whole budget. So we'll see how we make out. So as a starting point, there's initial assumptions just made by staff or discussions with the mayor. In no way does this reflect council's will. It's just that we've made some suggestions just to get this first draft out the door on tax rate assessment, things like that. Now, the province won't release the full assessment base until October. But best practices are still that you go through expenses and capital plans. So by the time they give us their numbers, it's just to massage it, that we shouldn't be waiting for those numbers, that it won't change that dramatically. There'll be some changes, but when their numbers come in, then you'd be expected to adjust the tax rate and borrowings as needed, or if there's a fluctuation, add services or decrease services as needed. But in my past, there hasn't, well, except maybe last year, we had expected a bigger increase than we had hoped, or a smaller increase than we had hoped. There's usually not a lot of adjustments that are needed to get the budget in balance by that point. So this is the introduction budget, just so you know that we've gone through it at staff several times, several times. This is version 4 or 5, but we've reviewed, we still could find a formula errors and stuff. So just to be aware that could be ongoing. It's important to know, get a 5-year budget before you, but you're only really are legally able to commit to next year as far as tax rate and things. But the 5-year plan introduced by the last council, and specifically Councillor Grew at the time, is to understanding the long-term effects your decisions have on today, which comes really important when it comes to borrowing and things, is to have at least a medium year window to understand that, you know, if we have all these projects, what your borrowing capacity is going to be like in a few years. Budget projections will be updated and can change substantially. We don't think so, but something, if winter started at the end of October and ran through, then that budget, for instance, could change dramatically from what we're looking at as a past history there. The good news is what's changed, or what's different from this budget than the past, is that most of our capital projects are completed. Some years we're still working on capital projects, and so the final cost is a little bit of an unknown. So that can change, but they all completed basically in the summer, and there's some other stuff that's still ongoing. But the big ones related to in-ground infrastructure were completed by Canada Day this year. Now, part of the discussions in operations, it's our preference to only highlight changes during this initial discussion. It doesn't mean council can't challenge us. It doesn't mean you can say, well, we want to change some of these things, but it's just that if you go line by line, there's 700 or 800 different line items. We'll be here till next October going through them all. So if some of you really like the numbers and want to come in and dig deeper into them, I'd suggest you make an appointment. I can talk to you at nights when you're not working or anything, and just to go through stuff. And that if you want to come back to council and say, I disagree with this item, then that's perfectly fine. But to go through everything would take a long time. And council at any point can debate levels of service. And for instance, we might say, oh, the wharf is too much money, we want to cut it out. So we'll take that out of the line item and get rid of it. Well, you certainly have that right at any point in the discussion. And it goes for other items too. And we'll talk a little bit more about things that staff are recommending for this next year's to increase the levels of service, but it's up to you to make the final decision if you buy into the concept or not. So I'm going to jump into the paper copy here as well. And I'm not going to go even department by department, just in the departments that we've seen substantial changes from prior years. And so some of the ones that are basically the same funding, we're going to maintain it. So right now, there's a 5% increase in the assessment base, which is new builds and market increases. But indications are really, it could be higher. I'm hearing that it could be 7 to 10%. But this is where we started. Just so you understand, a 1% change in the assessment is about $40,000 because it's 1% at $1.26. Where if you guys make a penny change to the tax rate, it's about $34,000. At the end of the day, it's really the same thing, but but just so you know, that either 1% or 1 cent is a $35,000 to $40,000 change in the revenue of the town. Because of the assumption that the market rates are going to go up because of the hot housing market we saw this year, you know, in discussions with the mayor, at least initially, we discussed it holding the tax rate at $1.26 for next year. Again, that's an assumption in draft 1. Now, in the forecast, or forecast is to have basically a $900,000 surplus. Why? There's $110,000 we've discussed about before an unplanned COVID recovery funding that came in early in the year that we didn't know about, which is great. We also had the sale of Sophia Street, which, this council, I think, participated in the spring, where the new vet clinic's going. The RCMP contract costs were down by $50,000 this year. As you remember, we had a very mild winter last year, and the snow removal costs are down significantly, specifically over time. And also the wear and tear in the vehicles, which are reflected in repairs and maintenance, are down. There's savings in the fire department due to slow transition to the new mobile communications. This council just agreed on that last meeting, I think, or in July. And we're going on in December, if I remember. And so we planned, I think, to be at the full year, which saved us $30,000 or $40,000 in communications costs, but that'll be coming up again next year. And there's also $400,000 saved in capital costs because of the deferred wharf and trail projects. As we discussed, it wasn't even so much at our end as we had to go through consultation period that got slowed down because of the election. And so we're basically just going to be able to do some design work this winter before we get into next year's budget. So on the next page, the first division is called Administrative Services, which is basically Town Hall and Council. You'll see that the audit costs have been reduced this year by about $5,000. Basically, every 3 years we have to get evaluator to look at employee benefits. And we already did that this past year. And so we'll have another 2 years we don't have to pay for that. Now, municipal plan studies are used for actions council thinks are important to fulfill the municipal plan. It can be like an economic development plan, environment plan, etc. That could be one place that we pull out the request from the environment committee. We could also give them a dedicated line item and take that out whatsoever. But that's usually specifically for some types of studies. The municipal plan came through that. But if council wants to kind of get high level analysis through a consultant at different various things within the municipal plan, that's where that would come out of. Now the RSC planning services did go up by 13,000, and Sander got off before I could tease him. Anyway, there was a budget submitted to the mayor, I think last week, and that came directly out of there. I haven't delved deep into it enough to see why there's such an increase, but that'll have to be approved at that level and passed along. I still say even at that rate for the town, for the level of services that they provide, I still think it's a good deal. The legal expenses are down to reflect what the cost has been the last few years. For a couple of 3 years, we had to increase it due to some ongoing and perceived litigation that came through, but that seems to be under control now. And most of it is just for ongoing cost related to our solicitor, Mr. McPhee, and then occasionally special things that come along. The janitorial costs are under review by staff. They're down a little bit this year. We're just trying to figure out what the best avenue to go. We think the service provider is doing an excellent job, but it's getting very busy for her, and maybe to the point where we have to look at an employee, to be honest, whether it's part-time or full-time. We're almost reached that point. We're still trying to look at that. The struggle is that she provides 7 days a week coverage and fines coverage. We have to hire an employee and a half to provide that level of service throughout the summer. And that's so what we realized, that could be a challenge. And professional development, when I first started, was at $15,000. I bumped it up there again because I've really asked staff to come back with more courses, more training opportunities, and I'd like to really push that. And it even go with council, that you do have your own line item there. But if there's other stuff that comes along, we can look at that. And so I think it's a worthwhile, any investment in professional development. And for me, I think it's stuff that is directly related to your job performance. So I wouldn't necessarily send staff at the town expense to learn how to make lobster traps, but it's things that are going to allow them to add value to the town and to their position within the town. The next page is talks about what's general government, and this is just kind of the overall stuff like the tax rates and things that are built in here. The one thing you'll see that the LSD fire has been reduced. There's a formula that is based on the assessment of the LSDs versus the town, basically, that figure out how much of our whole fire budget's apportioned. And I'm just making an assumption that we're probably going to outpace our growth in the tax base in the town over the LSDs, and so that'll go down. I will mention that when we met with the minister a couple of weeks ago with the mayor, that we brought that to his attention, that we don't think that's really reflective or a good way to reflect the actual cost or the actual dedication. And he said he would take it back. In one way, it's a formula that's been in place for decades, and it should be worth review, and under local governance reform, it should be considered. You'll also see the retirement and state benefits have gone up. I'll say that the benefit itself hasn't gone up. That is that we haven't changed anything for the employees. It's just basically because we're getting older, the actuarial report that we talked about as part of our audit process shows that the cost is going up. So that's more reflective of the age of our employees than it is of any extra benefits that are being accrued to the town. Just it's helpful when we hire people the age of Mr. Knopper and Ms. Nod to lower that average age down than when we're old farts like Mr. Acton and I that can bring it up. Fiscal services. So there's a line item there that's actually called surplus second previous year. So as a reminder to council, all that happens is that municipalities are supposed to be self-balancing, which is hard to do on a practical basis. And so what they do is the revenue or surplus or deficit of 1 year is moved ahead 2 years after the audit, which basically incorporates that to make it a self-balancing, so that over a 5-year period, we're not spending more than we've collected in revenue. As talked about before, we have $900,000 in anticipated savings. All of that is in here being transferred to the general capital reserve fund. So it is staff's recommendation, and it's up to council, but it's staff's recommendation that we transfer all that money to be used on future capital. Now, the only thing that's, I don't know if the word's unfortunate, but that you have to realize is that can't be used for in-ground infrastructure because the general fund is everything that isn't under the utility. So sewer mains and water mains aren't financed through that 900,000. And maybe we'll have to have a discussion of transferring it, but it's not that easy because you have the accounting rules of the province that they have to be isolated to the specific utility or the fund that it came out of. We're not talking fully in capital tonight, I don't think, but in the 2022 budget, we have $100,000 also being put towards the general capital reserve fund. That council made it a priority towards a ladder truck. It is staff's recommendation right now the ladder truck not be purchased until 2023. But that's up for discussion and debate, certainly, but that's right now where it stands. Economic development is one of those, on the next page, is one of those departments that really you have almost full control over. Right now, the assistance grants are maintained at a fairly high level. The $25,000, if I'm not mistaken, this might be the first year or only the second year that we've done it. Traditionally, it's been about $15,000 a year. As you can see in the projections, we don't have that much projected to go. You can reduce it, but it's really up to you. Certainly nonprofits are in need in town and want to offer more services and stuff, but it's just whether it's through taxpayer or their own interest or potentially that you could reduce that in order to go other places, with the funding is a potential. The cruise ship initiative, it's only $3,000 and it's something that because of COVID, we haven't seen the last couple of years. We do tentatively have 3 ships that are supposed to come in 2023. And the World was one of them. If any of you remember, that was that big private condominium development, essentially, of the seas. And they had for fall of 2023, but COVID might have changed that. But we belong to port associations that on our behalf go and try to attract this business. We don't have our own staff doing it. And right now, CRTA's representative, Ms. Hill, goes to these meetings in Nova Scotia. And the balance can be used for import experiences, which really, I guess, won't be any this year, truth be told, so we can cut it this year down some. But, everything from bagpipers, sometimes we buy flowers, to make it a really good experience for when people come here, that it's right now it's working out pretty good because the last few years, the bigger boats are coming in the fall, making almost like a fall foliage run and not in the summer. And the company that used to come predominantly in the summer, company from Rhode Island anyway, can't remember, but you know what I mean, the 2-level cruise ship that used to come, they're actually out of business now. COVID unfortunately ceased their business. Blunt, thank you. They're Blunt's out of business, unfortunately, notified. So, I mean, yeah, and so they're the only ones, so they could, you know, those boats could be either repurposed or they could reform, reorganize, whatever. But, and still make, but right now we have no future bookings with them. Sorry?
Council, just so you're aware that when we do look at the cruise ships, there will be some new processes that are going to be in place with the COVID restrictions. So just keep that in mind with the budget funding. We have been in talks with what kind of designs or what they'd be looking for the wharf, but at this point, there's no hard and fast dollars. But just to let you know, that's something that will be into consideration when we're looking at the cruise ships.
And to follow up on that, I think Transport Canada is still figuring out what to do. There's a possibility that they won't get it figured out for small ports like us and make it so restrictive that it'll take us off the market. But I'm not saying that's going to be the case, but just so you're aware that they're trying to figure out isolating and stuff. But we've got over a year to figure that out because it'll be the earliest 2 years from now, late 2022, potentially. So a year from now before we have to worry about it. So we'll look. Tourism services. So that's the accommodation levy. And the way that we budget the accommodation levy is we just show it in and out of the budget. The reason we do that is so it doesn't affect the tax rate. It's really money coming in. And so we just show it money going out. So we're not showing we're using it to offset any of these services that, because under the legislation, it's supposed to be over and above our own internal economic development was the initial plan. So there's $86,000 that's expected to be raised this current year. Those reports will probably start trickling in October, I think. And so we won't know until mid of October how much that final number is, but all indications it's going to be minimum 75,000 and up. So that'll be available next year for council's direction. I expect the Tourism Association Board might have some recommendations for us on it, but it can be, it's really under our agreement with them. It's under council's wishes. So it's as long as it has some type of gray area being related to tourism. So it could be something, washrooms, infrastructure. It doesn't necessarily have to be marketing and promotion. A new backhoe and public works probably wouldn't follow underneath that, but a new lawnmowers or garden stuff to update our parks and stuff, I could argue is something there. Right now under the agreement too, we raise it 1 year and spend it on the next. And yeah, in this year's, we actually gave it, the last council decided to give it to TEL because of the bad year in 2020. And so this council will be the first council that has an opportunity to look at that funding and decide how to deal with it. The next unit I'll be looking at is the medical center. So the medical center is pretty straightforward. There's one line item there that is recruitment efforts. And as you know, we successfully have a second physician there in Dr. Levesque Taylor, but it doesn't necessarily mean you shouldn't continue with recruitment. Dr. Pierre's been here for quite a few years and would like to someday retire, I'm sure. And for you hearing this, don't worry, he hasn't given me an indication. He's not leaving the office tomorrow. But what Dr. Levesque Taylor does have experience in this through her practice at West, and she's brought in students in the past. It might be something we can look at here. So individuals in their second or third year to get them into the Charlotte County into rural medicine to get them experience to that, because a lot of them at a medical school, if they don't have that experience, it overwhelms them thinking of not having the resources. So I think it's at least we should maintain it at that level, and maybe the Mayor Henderson and I can have a better discussion with them to see if there's any longer term plans about this. and to come up with a better plan for next year.
Perfect. Thanks for everything so far. I just want to check in with council, see if anyone has any questions or comments so far on anything they've heard. Perfect. It's because you're doing a fabulous job.
Thank you. As accountants, we would look forward to this time of year. Yeah. One thing that we don't have built into the budget that we have to think about, though, is what we're going to do about a dentist services. And if we're going to capitalize that, I'm going to hear if we contribute, if we build a dental suite and hope to come. It's a 20-year anniversary of what's his face's movie that came up with that concept, Field of Dreams. Anyway, but I'm hearing 100 to 125 is what somebody told me. If we wanted to build a suite to try to attract people and work out some people right there, not built into the budget whatsoever now, but it's just putting it out there that if you think that's a service, and there's quite a few people that inquire about it, as far as people look for dentists, but it's been hard to attract anybody. Policing services. So the member association, meaning the RCMP members are now, I guess, unionized for lack of a better word, came to terms, but there was a large retroactive pay increase that came with that. They haven't been with that contract forever, but I guess, but even I think their pay increases go back 5 years, 2017. And so for the town of St. Andrews, our portion of that's $80,000. So that's being worked into our budget this year. So that's why it's such a large increase. But also, some of that's we're already worked into this year's budget, part of it that we accrued it, that we recognized part of it. But part of our savings this year is because the town's contractually supposed to have 3 members, but for various reasons, and the whole RCMP is short-staffed right across Canada. They're having trouble with recruitment and retention. We have only been billed for 2 members for most of this year, including the most recent one. And so if we get that 3rd member restored, it'll only be for 1 quarter. So the savings should be recognized right to the end of the year, as far as I can go. But as you can see, moving forward, there's going to be ongoing increases for the current members. So besides the 80,000, there's going to be, it goes up next year, then comes back down a little bit, but that reflects the ongoing cost of policing services moving forward for the membership. The fire services. The protective clothing is down, and we've had a multi-year program where we've been replacing the bunker gear. So for you that don't know, that's looks like those big yellow suits that they'll wear, or black maybe, that they run into the black, thank you, Councillor, that they run into the buildings with that are fire retardant. I'm not going to say fireproof. They're cleaned and managed and stuff, but we've replaced just about all of them over the last 4 years, I think. And somebody helped us assist in getting them washed. And we also know we send them, we just had some return that are inspected every few years in rotation to ensure they're safe. So we've got them on a program now that they'll be replaced as needed where they had fallen behind for a few years. So we're in pretty good shape there. The communications, as talked about before, with the new truck mobile radio system, that increase. Repairs and maintenance have jumped up to 7,500, basically to update the appliances. It's the same appliances they've had there for 20 years, I guess. So it's just a fridge and stove and maybe a microwave and things. We are going to be in this year's budget, I think, replacing some of the flooring in the offices and things. Yeah. And so trying to update the internal. We'll talk about capital, and there's some more work going to be done on the town hall when we get to that discussion later. Now, within the fire department, there's something called water cost. That it's a number that is a transfer of cost from the utility department over to the water department, or to the town. What's it reflective of? Is thinking like this. Let's say we didn't need fire protection services at all, that whatever we had, it was all cement or something. Just use a ridiculous example that we don't need fire protection for whatever reason. That we wouldn't need the reservoirs as big as we do, the in-ground piping. A lot of our infrastructure is built in order to meet fire protection, which is fine and is needed. I don't disagree with that. But when they're building water mains and reservoirs, or the water department, they're absorbing all that cost. And so this is to transfer some of that cost, rightfully so, back to the general fund, which houses fire suppression. And this is why that transfer is allowed. Now, there's a big debate on how much should be allowed. In the last council, they capped it at $75,000. In the legislation, it's either 30 or 35% of all your water costs. That includes financing and capital and things. And so for the town, I did a calculation earlier. That figure could be up as high as $150,000 to $160,000 could be transferred or better. And as part of the provincial budgets we fill out, so we have a different form. They calculate that every year, and that's what it would have been last year. So you're aware. There's different reasons to look at it, but when you think about the new development that's going in, especially with the subdivision where the town's putting in infrastructure, well, a big portion of the cost is the in-ground infrastructure. But if we try to recover it by rates only, it's going to have to increase them substantially. But if you think about how much revenue is going to be raised by the tax side of things because of the value put in there, that to me, it's fair that some of that cost is coming out of general revenue. The tax revenue being transferred to the utility to help offset it, that it's unfair just to throw it in all the rates because you're adding value to the overall development because you're providing services. So that's why we're recommending at this point that we've increased that, I think, to 125,000 this year. And that's staff's recommendation. Again, that's a recommendation and that has to be approved by council. Public Works. We had really big savings in fuel costs this year. But as you know, fuel costs have been really increasing substantially. Plus we had the mild winter. We're saying to leave the fuel cost the same moving into next year. There's really not a change, but if you looked at the savings, you might be thinking that we should reduce it. And at this point, we're saying no. Culverts and ditches, we reduced to match kind of our history over the last 3 years. We had increased it because we had bought some extra large culverts, which are expensive to look after some drainage issues previously, but that's kind of gone by the wayside now as far as with the investments have already been made. So we feel that we're able to live at $15,000 for next year on that, which is a decrease from 20,000. And the increase in wages is reflective of earlier approved adjustments that council was aware of through the updating of the policy and the pay scales. Very little change in the library and other cultural services. Within the Ross Museum, there was repairs increased by $5,000 that we wanted to repaint it. It's the inside walls and stuff on the main area have to be painted. And then is it shutters or screens? Shutters and screens have to be painted next year. And so that's a one-time cost and it'll be reduced moving forward. Now, Parks and Recreation, the biggest increases in wages. Now, I did notice, and this was my fault, there's an error in last year's formula that we only picked up one employee. So that, this year's budget, because of the various savings, was able to absorb it. But there is another change, though, that we've noticed that because the extra green spaces, the extra services, things, everything related from what we're doing with sidewalks and stuff, we'd like to add an additional seasonal employee to help with everything that we're doing this year. Up until about 2 or 3 years ago, we always had a full-time employee that worked just at Centennial Park and the Blockhouse, plus the 2 seasonal workers that came from the arena. We eliminated that for 2 or 3 years, especially with COVID, just to see how it worked out if we could do it. We could do it, but things suffered really. And like the asphalt program was put on, some of the ditching and things had to be delayed. And so it was juggling employees. And what's even hard is a struggle is that our public works employees are not blacklisted, but they're prevented from taking vacations over the winter months because we need them to be available for snow plowing. And so get 5 or 6 employees shoving all their vacation into a 4 or 5 month window. And so you're always short somebody. You're just always, and because of the long-term nature of our employees, most of them have 4 to 5 weeks vacation due to them every year. And so we just never have full manpower once we hit about the month of mid-May. And so it's important that we have that extra person to help proceed with that. And that's our recommendation right now. So for the arena, within the current budget, it hasn't been worked into our budget, within the RC budget, there is additional fees that could come in from the LSD. We have to come up with an agreement with them. But that's approximately $50,000 that'll go towards there. And they're working with the RSC on a rec director's job description. Now, as you know, last October, our previous arena manager retired. And so we left the position vacant, thinking the previous council wanted to look at repurposing it. That the previous position was mostly facility management, but now we're wondering about program management as a more focus. And Public Works has taken over a lot of the day-to-day operations of it. Having said that, this person should be brought up to date on some of the stuff to take some of that off. And so they're aware and help make the decisions with Mr. Acton. But their focus will be more on programming and working with different groups like the Age-Friendly Community, probably helping with what we do with the fitness center, things like that would be more their thing. And there may be some provincial funding towards this as well. We had met with the department a few months ago, and of course there's been elections and things have changed. But there was a program where if we hired a rec director, I think we got 75% of 50. Go ahead.
Sorry, Your Worship. So the program would be over 5 years with a decreasing amount of input from the province, starting at 75%, working its way down to 25%, and eventually zero in the year 5. So if this program is still available, which we are still hoping, it would help us in the long term for establishing this position.
Which means the cost of the town of St. Andrews and the LSDs to be next to nothing. But we could use, that extra funding towards programming or upgrades or whatever. Youth Center. In the Youth Center, their salary increases are the biggest changes, primarily because of wage adjustments. There's no extra people there. We just had determined earlier in the year that we'd underpaid some of the staff, and so we brought them up. We also should commend the staff that there's a lot of still donations coming through the community, either in cash or in kind, that helps pay for a lot of the day-to-day stuff they need, everything from art supplies to sporting equipment and stuff. And so to date, we've had to minimally input stuff for that. And of course, we continue to be thankful for the Tecolotti Foundation and Mrs. Flamer for her ongoing support of some of the wages within that facility as well. So council, that is the general operating fund. Is there any questions, I guess, to date? And it really was my intention to end at that tonight, but if we want to continue, I can stop the presentation and start walking through. But I commend you for staying awake that long, so that'll leave it up to the mayor to discuss with you what next steps.
Well, thank you. I don't think you were expecting that to go as quick as it did. I think for council's perspective is we're kind of waiting to see what the final dollar is before we kind of want to lock in any decisions. There's a lot of things that you brought up today that I certainly appreciate, and I know that there's more, but I'm almost wondering strategy. Are we better to have multiple nights and do this, or are we better to have like an all-day Saturday type work session and just get it out of the way versus meet for weeks on end? And like, I almost wonder if just once we have that amount, just sit down together and make the decisions. I question if this has to be a really drawn out process. I think at the end of the day, for me personally, the only thing I want to see is when you look at our kind of our 5-year budget, is that we're taking into account all of our priorities that we've identified, so that those are all somehow caught in this. But you've asked a lot of questions and you're not getting a lot of answers on some of the stuff today, but I think we need to know what the final number is before we're comfortable. And then that's kind of, if you do this, we're going to have to save it here. If you do that, like, I think that's what council really needs to know is where they have to. Cause I think generally I could be wrong from this council, but we're good with status quo as long as our priorities are captured. Would that be safe to say with you guys? So I don't want to hint at being too short of a process, but I think that they like the general direction of where this is going. I'll pass it to other members of council actually just to comment on what they've seen so far to make sure that I've captured kind of what you're feeling, because I'm making assumptions as well. Councillor Heenan.
Well, Mr. Spear, to start with, you are the professional. You've done this. I have to say it's a great document. I am fortunately or unfortunately after the equal sign. That's how I work. So I like to just see what happens after the equal sign. We have this much money coming in. This is our priorities. This is what we have left. Like, those are the kinds of things, like, you know, I can look through here and I could ask you 300 questions on this spreadsheet, but I fully trust the work that you folks do. And I do believe that that is a benefit to this council. And I think that our worship is correct on the fact that we need just more concise information in order to make a decision. Like, I don't need to know, for an example, it's $694 for revenue from a vending machine. You know, I mean, it's important. I know it has to be on a spreadsheet, but it does, those fine details are your work, not ours. It's just our work to make sure our priorities are met. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thanks, Councillor Heenan. I do concur. So we are making kind of some assumptions on what the kind of our growth rate will be just through an increase in assessment. And there's reason to believe that it will come in that, but to our CAO's point, we got surprised last year where it didn't come in at the number we thought it was going to. So almost right now we could dive in and say, should we do this? Should we do that? But the reality is when we get that final number, we're going to have to do that anyway. So doing it right now might feel a little, I guess you could say, early. Great point. So Councillor Heenan, anyone else? I think that kind of captures kind of what we're feeling. So no, that's great. So for timing, do you have a specific date when you think you'll have that number? I know there's some variables outside of your control on that one.
Yeah, and Your Worship, I guess, I mean, that's usually the second week in October. I think last year's when we got it. I wouldn't recommend us waiting that long. The operations don't tend to excite councils too much. You'd be the first one. Really, what's the tell-all? And again, well, we've already been here 2 hours, so we won't go on. But the capital budget is what's really going to be the talk about. We've worked in stuff about the ladder truck, which I discussed earlier, and that was a high priority. Maybe you don't want to wait a year. We can back that up. There's assumption made on investing in the subdivision expansion and stuff that will tell more. And then all that ties into borrowing, and you're going to have to make decisions about what level of comfort. Right now, we're going to have to check through our figures, but the level of borrowing seems to be pretty good, to be honest. There's nothing there that scares me in the general fund. That
You shouldn't tell us that.
no, well, I know, but it's still, I guess it goes back to things like, for instance, I mean, in this first edition, when we get into capital, I assumed that we'd only be recovering half of the cost from developers or land purchasers in the subdivision costs. Maybe you think that's too much, maybe you think that's too little. And so that's the type of discussions that the stuff we've gone over tonight, all very important services, all very important to day-to-day lives.
But consistent.
Consistent and very little you can change, without making a big change to everything.
Without cutting a particular
It's really the
service.
capital that most councils are going to focus on, and I suspect you guys will be. So there's really two different ways we can look at that. I'm on my way for a couple of weeks vacation after this, on Wednesday, after Wednesday. So we talked about that we could meet on the 29th, which is, no, we can't do that. I thought that was.
Who wants to check their date on that? Personally, myself, I'd rather just hammer through this than delay it, like have weekly an extra meeting. I'd rather just have a work session and get it through.
Yeah. Yeah. So would you rather do it on a Saturday or the 29th? So I guess.
Personally, I prefer Saturday. I believe
Excuse me, which Saturday would you be looking at?
Just a moment, Council. I got to check something because I just want to make sure. Was it UNB doing? No, the UNB wasn't doing AGM this year, were they? They were just having those Thursday night
series of virtual.
Yeah. Okay. So that won't be going on. Okay. So
they'd have to have their meeting though, right? Where they have the actual motions.
Yeah, just a moment. I'll just check
Let's
to confirm on that
the
date.
AGM is just to make sure. Of course, to be honest, we could probably do the AGM together. Be a nice little fun break for us all, wouldn't it? No one agrees it's a fun break. Yes, there will be pizza included in this offer.
Well, I mean, we don't have to decide tonight, but maybe we'll tentatively say October 2nd and staff will let you know if that conflicts. Is 8 a.m. too early for you folks? Okay, 9 a.m. okay? It doesn't hurt any of staff's feelings. 9 or 10?
Someone has 3 kids, 8 a.m. So I'd be at 6 a.m. just to get out of the house.
9 a.m.
Not 9 a.m.?
9 a.m. We'll say 9 to
9 to
3,
9.
but we'll try to be as concise and give you the, even the capital. And like I say, council, you've got all the capital and borrowing there. Feel free to go through it. To be fair, Emily did a lot of the work this year. She worked on my templates from past, but it got to the point where I say, you figure it out and I'll come back and tell you if they're going to fire us or not. So she did a lot of the legwork and understands the figures too. So if I'm away and you have questions on line items, feel free, but I'll be back on the 27th. And so if you want to talk to me before our meeting to get together, one-on-one about some of these items, you don't understand what they are, even the capital, or you want to understand the financing model, give me a call and we'll work something out and talk you through it.
And sorry, on October 2nd, we won't have the appraised value.
Probably not, your worship, but again, it's only a $60,000 difference, even if it's another 2%, right? It's not going to be a make or break for this council. So I don't want to leave it that long.
Okay. And the reality is if it came in less, that's when unfortunately you do look at maybe a mill rate adjustment. You want to have a consistent growth of your tax base just to keep up with costs. So we won't speculate anything at this point. It's a healthy growth rate though that you put in there. But there's a lot of reason to believe. I don't know if you have a rough number of how many houses have sold in the community.
Well, I'm going to put it this way, your worship. It won't be below 5%. I was talking.
That's how conservative it is.
That's 100%. Sure.
Okay. So you might be able to get pizza and garlic fingers is what he's saying.
With bacon bits on it. That's how confident I am.
I think we know that every dollar we get, we could greatly use. So, yeah, okay, that makes sense. Is there any other questions in regards to the budget process? It has been 2 hours, so I'm just keeping track. Everyone's home. Councilor Hurdle.
Just a quick question for you, Mr. Spear. I don't want to, I guess, for us to come across as flippant of the work that was put into this. So, and of course, you would have the experience over myself, but if it would, I guess it would make you feel more comfortable to have somebody on council to go through this in detail. I want to be aware of your time, respectful of your time as well. But if you would like that, I'd be more open to doing a deeper dive if that's a good use of your time. I also don't want to be breathing down your neck on this stuff either. I do trust the work that you've done, but it's kind of in my wheelhouse. So
the offers are back to council. It's always good to have council support if someone feels they'd like to go in, or a couple of 3 of you, just to go through and make sure you agree with kind of our reasoning. Most of it's based on history. And maybe what we can do next time, because Emily had the 2020 actuals also built into a version, but if we added that to this, it'd make it too small for anyone to read. But if I'm more than willing to sit with anybody or a group of you, if you want to go through that. I mean, I'm comfortable with where it is, to be honest. I've been at it long enough, but I respect council and, just because I've been at it a long time, sometimes that's against you because sometimes you're not thinking outside the box. So I won't be insulted if anyone wants to sit with me. I'm just saying it's probably not a good use of the group's time to go through it too much detail because it'll just really slow the process down is all I'm thinking.
Agreed.
One other thing you might want to consider too is in the past, we haven't for the last year or two, but we used to have early consultation with the public. It was very general as to say, this is kind of where we think we're going. Here's what we're thinking for projects. What do you think? Not really well attended, I'll be honest. Really, Terry? No, most times we're just talking to the council. But some places go through that. This council, even tonight, I know some communities, even larger than ours, where staff prepares it all and council might give it 3 hours debate and gets passed. So don't think you're being flippant about it. The fact that you even went through this much is more than some councils do. And staff, feel like that. Like I said, I'm just pointing out the high level stuff because the other stuff is pretty straightforward. But again, it's really up to council. I'll let you steer the ship. Just didn't want to drag it out any more than we have to.
Yeah, and I know that the budget meetings particularly aren't very well attended, but I do think it's important, especially with the technology we have, that we just do a quick summary presentation of saying these are the major changes, these are the capital projects the town's investing in, this is the mill rate, this is how much the appraisals went up. I think just that level of transparency, just having it out there for people if they did want to come or did want to watch it online, I think it's very imperative. And I'll be honest, even though we're part of it, it's for me, it's a nice little summary. In case people have questions, it's a document and a presentation that I can reference. So I think that's something that we should all aim to do towards the end of the process, and maybe, a couple weeks before the vote. So that way we have an opportunity to maybe have some questions or some engagement before.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, Worshipman, that's a great suggestion, and we've traditionally done that too. Talking specifically about the pre-consultation that some places do, but the community isn't that engaged. They're more concerned about what is the mill rate going to be, and what are you going to be doing for projects. And as always, we're always open to suggestions at any point in time. The other thing to remember, council and the public, is that this is a roadmap. It doesn't mean council can't make the decision to change course going into the new year. So if opportunities come up or you want to add a new service, you say to staff, we need to do ABC, then we'll try to figure out how to do it. What we didn't talk about here, we do have and also a general operating reserve fund, which is just, by legislation, it can't be too big of a figure. But let's say you wanted to add something in the middle of next year, I don't know what, some new service, you wanted to have clowns go up and down Water Street to entertain the kids all summer long. Well, there's an avenue of a savings account that, so to speak, that we can find money out of that without necessarily cutting services for limited stuff like that, just so you're aware. I know that's a ridiculous example, but after 2.5 hours, that's the best I could come up with. But there's ability to manipulate the budget even after the fact, and previous councils have. Things weren't going their way. So this is just to provide structure for us moving into next year, that's all.
Perfect. All right. Any other questions? Otherwise, we'll wrap this up in essence of time. There's still lots of time to talk about budget. All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Spear, and to all of staff for all of your work on this. It's greatly appreciated. And I can tell you that you guys make it a very easy process. Not to say, there isn't going to be some meaningful conversations in the future, especially when it comes to capital projects, but that certainly is a good starting place for all of us to digest it. So thank you for that. At this point, that wraps up that particular. So section E, we're getting in. There's nothing under new business, so we'll do question period. Mr. Knopper, was there any questions this evening?
Through you, your worship, we've received no questions.
Thank you very much. Any councillor comments? Councillor Heenan.
Yes, your worship. I was brought to the attention of a new subdivision being built by our watershed. Does anyone else ever hear of this? It was brought to my attention today. It's does anyone ever hear anything about it?
Not that I'm aware of right now, but we'll have to look. There's environmental protections around there, so that's all I can say is that I hope Department of Local Government's doing their thing, but I certainly can follow up with our own planners who also have jurisdiction out there to find out exactly what's going on. And what's in the watershed and what could affect the watershed could be two different things, because a watershed is a vast piece of property, all very important. I don't want to, but it may not be that adjacent to a water supply.
Thank you, Mr. Spear.
Thank you for the question. So Mr. Spear will follow up, but I do know there is one that's before the watershed, right? That's being worked on. So that could be just some information that's getting out there. Any other member? Councillor Blanchard.
Just quickly, and it actually, I meant to ask this question when we were dealing with the RFP at Diana. With the draft proposal for the RFP that came to council, I did provide some feedback back to staff on that with regards to the criteria. We talked about energy efficiency. Within one of the criteria, it referred to air conditioning in all the units as one of the criteria that would be a positive. Where we do also list in there energy efficiency, I thought instead of air conditioning units, heat pump units would be a much more efficient way to do that. So it just seemed counterintuitive to say we're looking for energy efficiency, we're also looking for air conditioning. So I just wondered if that could be adjusted in the RFP as part of the proposal that goes out.
certainly not. That's what staff's intent was, heat pumps, but we'll make it more clear.
Perfect. Anyone else? All right, I'm good myself this evening. No need to go to closed session, so I'll be looking for a motion to adjourn. Deputy Mayor Akaji, sorry guys, she always gets it. Councillor Blanchard, second it. All in favor of adjourning, please signify by saying aye. That's everybody. We're adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody, for this evening.